Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. I thought I was telling in a tent, and I had a whole different set of stories in my mind, and then so you have to come see me later for those. Not that you'll know the difference, but I was flying from New York City to Charleston, West Virginia, which means I was on my way to Atlanta, and I'm sort of a superstitious person in some aspects of my life. I cut my hand really bad, and I had to go to the doctor and get stitches, and she gave me 13 stitches, and I said to her, "Doc, you either got to put one more in, or you got to take one out." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because 13 stitches would be bad luck." And she looked at this grievous wound, and she said, "Don't you think you've already had the bad luck?" And I said, "You can't be too careful." So when I fly, I have a strict routine that I go through. Now, I fly just enough that I generally get to sit in the exit row. So I get on the plane, and I take my bag, and I put it under the seat in front of me. And then the person in front of me invariably turns around and says, "Your bag strap is in my personal space." And then I have to pull that back. And then I get out the in-flight magazine, and I have to complete the Sudoku puzzle before the plane takes off, or I know we're all going to die. So I got on the plane, I got situated, and just as I was opening the magazine, I saw the flight attendant coming back. I was the only person in that exit row, and when you sit in the exit row, the flight attendant comes back before you take off, and he or she says, kind of quietly, just so no one else panics, they say, "Do you know that you are aware you're in the exit row?" And then you have to respond verbally, "Yes." And then they say, "Are you willing and able to help in the event of an emergency?" And when this policy was first started, they were very serious, and you had to respond in the affirmative, "Yes." But now, as long as you respond verbally, they're generally okay. So I like to say something like, "Pop-Tarts." So we went through that, and I opened up the magazine, and I looked at the Sudoku puzzle, and some inconsiderate person had already completed the easy Sudoku puzzle, jeopardizing the lives of every person on that plane. So I had to do the difficult Sudoku puzzle, and even though we were at LaGuardia, where you have to taxi for 3 days, I did not finish the puzzle before the plane took off. So I thought, we're all doomed, I might as well go to sleep, because that's how I want it to happen. I don't want to scream for 30,000 feet. I want to wake up about a foot above the ground, like, and then it's over. And we got about an hour out of Atlanta, and the pilot came on the loudspeaker. You can always tell it's the pilot, doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, because they always start out the same way. They go, And then they chuckle to let you know whatever they're about to say is meaningless. They go, "This is the pilot speaking. I just thought you might like to know the plane that took off after us at LaGuardia saw some debris on the runway. We might have blown a tire. But don't worry about it, we got lots of tires, and there's no light in the cockpit indicating that we have a flat tire. So sit back and enjoy your flight." I thought, well, wait a minute. He said there's no light in the cockpit indicating that we have a flat tire. Does that mean that the light that indicates that there's a flat tire is not illuminated, or that no one ever bothered to install a light to indicate whether or not there was a flat tire? And I thought, well, there's nothing I can do about this. I'm just going to go back to sleep. So I was leaning back, and here came the flight attendant down the aisle, and she leaned into my seat very quietly, and she said, "Do you remember how before we took off, you said you would be willing and able to help in the event of an emergency?" And I thought, that is not what I said. I said Pop-Tarts. But I acknowledged that that had been the intent of my words, and she said, "Were you serious?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess I was." And she said, "Good, because we do have a flat tire. It's on your side of the plane. And we were wondering if you would be willing to change it for us." I thought, well, yeah, sure, that falls within my skill set, changing a tire. And she said, I said, yeah. And she said, what any woman would say in the situation, do you want the owner's manual? And I said, what any man would say in the situation. I said, oh, no, I don't need the owner's manual. And so I reached over, and there was the emergency door, and I punched out the plexiglass, which was very satisfying. I'd always wanted to do that. And I opened up the door, and I turned it sideways, and I put it in the seat over here next to me, and the ramp shot out, and I slid down the ramp, and I examined the tire, and sure enough, it was flat. So I came back up the ramp, I went down the aisle of the airplane, went into the cockpit. Now, I will tell you that when I'm writing stories, sometimes I get to a point where I think the audience may not believe that. It took me that far in this story to think you might have your credibility tested. So I went in the cockpit, and I got down between the pilot and the co-pilot seat, and there's a little plastic thing there, and I gave them each their cup of coffee. And then there were about 10 empty CD cases, $1.20 and penny, and some empty gum wrappers. I moved that. I rolled the carpet back, and I lifted up the little lever. I started to twist that so that, the spare tire would lower beneath the airplane on that cable. And then I asked if I could have a headset, and I went back down the aisle, went out the emergency door, got up on top of the airplane, walked to the back, popped the trunk, dug through there's some umbrellas back there, some incomplete socket sets, a couple of jumper cables, and finally I found the tire iron. You don't need the jack at 30,000 feet. I went back down the length of the plane, slid down the ramp, got to the tire. Sure enough, again, it was flat. And now I got on the headset, and I said to the pilot, I said, go ahead and roll her over. And he said, roll what over? I said, roll the plane over. He said, why would I roll the plane over? I said, so I can stand on the wing, so I can change this tire. He said, negatory on the rollover, we just serve drinks to first class. And they do have a higher mile status than I, so I thought, well, what I normally do when I change a tire is I put the tire iron on one of the lug nuts at whatever angle that would be, and then I stand on it with 1 foot, possibly 2 feet, until it goes, and then it just kind of slides this way, and my foot slides off, and I hit the ground. And I thought, that's not going to work in this situation. And so what I had to do is I had to actually get in the rim of the tire, and I pushed my back up against this part of the rim, and I put the tire iron across from me on a lug nut, and then I just pushed as hard as I could, bracing my back against it, and finally I got all the lug nuts off. I got those in my pocket, because, again, normally I just lay them right there, but I thought, they won't be there when I need them. I took the flat tire, went up, put it in the seat, and then I went back down. Now I had to catch the spare tire, which was hanging on that cable underneath the airplane, and I finally got hold of that, and I brought it over, but it was one of those jobs where you have to unscrew the bolt and then release the right angle latch and then get the tire off of that. So I had the cable in my mouth, and I was holding the tire like this, and I was trying to undo that bolt, and the whole time I was thinking, you know what, under adverse conditions, this would be nearly impossible. But I finally got it off, and I put the new tire on, and I bolted it, and I got back up in my seat, and I shut the door, but I didn't lock it because I knew in 10 miles I was going to have to get out and check the lug nuts again. And then I took the flat tire, and I just pushed it under the seat in front of me because I figured when we got to Atlanta, they were just going to plug it and put it back on. And so, and the spare tire, the spare tire was smaller than the other tires and had a yellow rim. And so I put the flat tire under the seat in front of me, and the guy in front of me turned around and said, your flat tire is in my personal space. And I didn't say anything. I just waited till he took a sip of coffee, and then I kicked the back of his seat as hard as I could. That didn't really happen. That's just a fantasy. But finally we landed, and everything was fine, and I got to my gate in Atlanta to fly on to Charleston. By the way, up there we call this the other Charleston. And I got to my gate, and they made an announcement that the flight was delayed due to mechanical difficulties, so I just walked home. People ask me all the time, they're like, how do you remember all of that? Well, let me tell you, if that happened to you. Now, my worst Christmas ever started the year before. When I was 4 years old, or 5, I forget how old I was, 5, let's say 5, we'll go with 4, let's go with 4. I asked my dad how he got the bald spot on the back of his head. This was just after Christmas, and I don't know, I guess he'd always had it, but I just noticed it then. And I asked him how he got it, and he said, well, on Christmas Eve, I heard something on the roof, and I went outside to investigate, and as I stepped from underneath the carport, I felt something lick the back of my head. And when I turned to look, there was Rudolph standing on the carport. He had licked my head and taken the hair right off of it. And Dad said, if I ever see Rudolph again, I'm going to shoo him away. But here's the thing, when you're 4, 2, 3, 4 years old, the world can be a very confusing place because you're really just starting to assemble a vocabulary. And everything that you hear, you have to filter through the few words that you know and try and make sense out of it. It's like when my daughter was probably 3 and was just amassing a vocabulary, and she just nailed her first shaky piton into the wall of understanding time. She finally figured out that not everything happens today. Remember that Eagles song, Life in the Fast Lane, everything all the time? People think that's about cocaine. I think it's about being 3 years old, because, right now. So my daughter finally figured out that not everything happened today. She finally figured out that there was another day. But the only other day that she could both understand and articulate was yesterday. So she would ask me questions such as, are we going to Grandma's house today or yesterday? And I, being the sort of father that I am, would say yesterday. She was totally fine with that. And so when my dad said, if I ever see Rudolph again, I am going to shoo him away, I had never heard that expression. And when I filtered it through what I did know, what I got was, if I ever see Rudolph again, I am going to shoot him anyway. And I thought, oh my goodness, my father's going to kill Rudolph. That could put a damper on my Christmas. And this was just after Christmas, so I worried about that for the rest of the year. And then I worried about it into the next year, but probably only into about January, because I was a little kid and you forget stuff quickly. And I forgot about it until the holiday season rolled around again that next year. And when you're an adult and you're old and you're jaded and you just don't care anymore, and someone says the holiday season, you think, oh my goodness, that incredibly stressful period of time between Thanksgiving and New Year's. But when you are a kid and someone says the holiday season, and you're a kid so you still have joy and hope in the world, you know that the first holiday, you three know, the first holiday in the holiday season, possibly the second most important holiday, at least in the Christian holiday season, is Halloween. Because it's the other day that you get free stuff with hardly doing nothing. And so, as the holiday season started to roll around again, I started to remember that my dad had sworn this vendetta against Rudolph. And I thought, I wonder if he is still holding the grudge. He still has the bald spot, I wonder. And so I wanted to ask him, but if he had forgotten, I didn't want to give it away. So I had to be kind of cool. And I said, Dad, do you even own a gun? And he said, no, but I could get one. And I said, do you hunt? And he said, no. But sometimes when at the barber, I read Field and Stream magazine. And I said, and this question, super surreptitious, I said, is it even legal to shoot a deer on your roof? No way he was seeing through that one. And I don't know what the urban deer population is like in Charleston, South Carolina, but at home in South Charleston, West Virginia, yeah, it's perfectly legal. If there's a deer on your roof, you can take it. So I was terribly worried that Dad was going to shoot Rudolph. And then, of course, Halloween is at the end of October, and in a very few days, the entire country was having an election for President of the United States of America. And I heard my neighbor say, if Jimmy Carter gets elected president, this entire country is going to go to hell. And I was 5, and I had a very narrow and very theological understanding of hell. And I thought, oh no, if Jimmy Carter gets elected, the people in Canada and the people in Mexico are just going to pull out the pins, and the entire continental United States of America is just going to drop into the sulfuric pits of Hades. And I thought, Dad's going to kill Rudolph. Jimmy Carter's taking us down because he did get elected. I thought, I don't even know if we're going to make it to Christmas. And about the only thing that I had going for me at the time was our kindergarten teacher was teaching us about world religions. Now, you're probably thinking this is a pretty heady academic curricula for a bunch of 5-year-olds, but there was going to be glitter, glue, and macaroni involved. But it was kind of progressive. She was a progressive woman. This was 1975, and she was from Half Dollar, West Virginia, but she had gone off to Columbia or Yale and, gotten all full of liberal and had come home, and this was right at the end of the hippie era, and she wasn't just a carrier, she had it. And so she was going to teach us about world religions. And, Half Dollar, West Virginia, I'm not apologizing or trying to make up for it. It's just what we were. We were a very rural, very white, very Christian community. And so for someone to teach us world religions, this was pretty progressive. And the first thing she told us was that not every child in the world celebrates Christmas. And I don't think we'd ever heard that before. And it rocked our world. We were shocked. But I have to admit, it wasn't for theological reasons. We didn't think, oh no, those poor children don't have the Lord Jesus Christ in their life. We thought, oh no, those poor children aren't going to get a bunch of stuff on Christmas morning. Because we were Americans. And so then we learned about Taoism and Buddhism and Confucianism. Now, most of us knew a little bit about Confucianism because there was a Chinese restaurant in the next town. So we had all had a fortune cookie that said something like, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Confucius, right? And I have to say here, I know I'm in a church, but I will say this, I used to be a pastor, so I feel like I have some credibility here, that not everyone in the world likes Christians, and as a church, we have done some fairly horrible things over the course of our history, but I think one of the reasons they don't like us now, let's just be frank about this, I think it's our decorations. We're really the only religion that decorates, and at least here, you never see a 12-foot inflatable Buddha out in somebody's yard. Like in a snow globe. I'm not saying that's not a good idea. I'm just saying you don't see Moses parting the Red Seas in some Jewish guy's yard. But anyway, so it's our decoration. But anyway, so we learned about that, and then we learned about Islam, and we learned about how the Muslims have Ramadan, and they fast for 40 days during daylight hours, and then we learned about the Hajj, about how the Islamics walk to Mecca, and to emulate that so we could feel what that was like. One day, so we could emulate the fast, one day we skipped snack. And then we knew what it was like to fast for 40 days during daylight hours. And then to emulate the Hajj, we walked from the elementary school to the Baptist church and back. Her heart was in the right place. It really was. And then we were gonna make a felt Santa Claus, and I really wanted to make this felt Santa really bad because it was beautiful. And I wanted to make it for several reasons. One, I knew if I did a great job on it, I could give it to my mother for Christmas. So it was a Christmas tree ornament, and she could hang it on the Christmas tree where the best ornaments go, which is, of course, the back of the Christmas tree. And also, I thought if I did a really good job on it, Santa would see that. And even if my dad did kill Rudolph, this would be like a positive talisman, a positive voodoo doll. We were studying world religions, and Santa would see that I had made this effort and he wouldn't visit the sins of the Father on the Son. And then we were going to make a menorah. It was exciting stuff. And then one day we were playing hide and seek at my house. I had some buddies over, and I was in the basement looking for a place to hide. And my older brother was on the couch. He had the measles. He was on the couch under a blanket watching television. And I thought, I know where I'm going to hide. I'm going to hide under the blanket of the measles victim. Because what idiot would look under the blanket of the measles victim? It never occurred to me what moron would hide. Nobody found me. In fact, I didn't see anybody but my mother and the doctor for about a week and a half. And when I finally went back to school, they had already made the Santa Clauses. Yeah, don't get too emotionally invested. Most of this is made up. And so I said, can I make the Santa Claus? And the teacher said, no, we've moved past that, but you can make a menorah. And I thought, I had the measles, not my bar mitzvah. So I went home and I told my mom, but you have to understand, I'm the last of 5 children. And I don't know if you've experienced the joys of being the last of many children, but it's hard because it's not that my parents didn't care anymore. It's just that the sympathy tank was empty. It was just, like when my mom went to call me for something, she would say, Paul, Kevin, Katie, Tammy, Deacon. Deacon was the dog. Before she ever got to my name. So if I wanted sympathy, I had to lose a limb and it not be my own fault if I was going to get any sympathy. So I went home, I didn't get to make the Santa Claus. And she was like, whatever doesn't kill you will put hair on your chest, go. And so it was terrible. And the only thing then that made me feel any better is a couple days later, Mom came home and she said that someone in the church had given her tickets to go to the Charleston Symphony Hall to see a show, and we were all going. And I was so excited. And you might be thinking, why is a 5-year-old boy excited about going to the Symphony Hall? It was who Mom said we were going to see. My mother said that we were going to see Elephant Gerald. And when I was a kid, I loved elephants. I had elephant knickknacks, elephant bed sheets, elephant posters, and I didn't really know who Elephant Gerald was, but Mom said it was a musical thing, and that Elephant Gerald had played with Count Basie and Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, and I didn't really know who those people were, but I knew you had to be important if you were going to play with a count, a duke, and the first man on the moon. So it was fast, and then, it was fascinating. And then I thought, Elephant Gerald has a name. How many elephants even have a name? How many can you name? There's Horton, Dumbo, seems like, and Babar. Babar was my favorite book. So this is the only 4th elephant I know who even has a name. And then I thought, how do elephants even make music? Do they stick out their trunk and play it like a trumpet, or stick it out to the side and another elephant plays it like a flute, or do they curve it and it's like a saxophone, or, and this was the best idea, do they come out maybe in a kilt, the elephant, and take their trunk and put it in their own mouth and then blow really hard and squeeze, and then I was 5. It was an intoxicating idea. And so I was so excited. And so the day finally arrived, and Mom told me to go downstairs and get dressed. And she had laid out an outfit for me. One day, my mom was sick, and so my dad was in charge of dressing me, which meant no one was in charge of dressing me. And this was late May, and I went to school in a turtleneck, cut off corduroys, socks up to my knees, and cowboy boots. And my mother has never been sick since. To this day, sometimes the phone will ring and I'll be like, hello, and she's like, what are you wearing? And I'm like, Mom, that's creepy. And so, but I had an outfit that I wanted to wear. I had a 3-piece suit. I think I was the only kid in my neighborhood who had a 3-piece suit. And better yet, I had assembled it myself. I knew that to have a three-piece suit, you had to have a pair of pants, a jacket, and a vest, all made out of the same material. Well, I'd grown up wearing blue jeans. I had a blue jean jacket, and I had recently acquired a denim vest. So I thought I had a three-piece suit. And I've also recently learned that this is called a Canadian tuxedo. And I hope those Canadian people aren't here that were here last night. My apologies. Because that guy was tough. And so I went upstairs in that, and my mother looked at that and just gave me, no, one of those. And so I had to go down and put on what she had laid out. And we got in the car and we drove to the Symphony Hall, and I had never been in any place like this, and there were men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns. I'd never seen that, and we went into the theater and we sat down, and the lights dimmed and the curtains opened and the music started, and what I assumed was the opening act came out on stage. It was a Rubenesque, middle-aged African-American woman, and she sang a song about a knife named Mac. And when that was over, I turned to my mother and I said, "Where is the elephant?" And she said, "Shh." And so the lady sang sleigh bells. And I said, "Where are the elephants?" And she said, "Shh." And this kept going on. And by this time, people around us were getting annoyed. This was in the old days when people used to get annoyed at other people's children, not their own stupid personal behavior in public places. And then she sang a Tisket a Tasket, and the lights came on, and there was a standing ovation, and she left the stage, and the curtains closed, and we went, and I was in the back of the car, and I was crying the way that only children can cry. I wanted to see the elephant. And my parents were like, "What is wrong with you? I wanted to see the elephant." And they were like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Elephant Road." And they just burst out laughing in that way that adults do when a child has completely misunderstood the world. My wife is from Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta. It is flat there. It is flatter there than it is here. And so one day her parents decided for vacation they'd go to the Great Smoky Mountains so their children could see what not flat looked like. And they're going up the Smokies. My wife was probably 6. She was chewing gum, and her sister said, "Oh, my ears just popped." And her mother said, "Oh, my ears just popped." And my wife said, "My ears have not popped. What will happen if my ears don't pop?" And her father said, "Your head will explode." And 5 minutes later, she was in the back seat. "My head is gonna explode." So we got home. Let's just recap here. Dad's gonna kill Rudolph. Jimmy Carter's taking us down. I didn't get to make Santa Claus. No elephants. And then we had to go visit Aunt Lenore. And maybe you have an Aunt Lenore in your family. She's someone she wasn't genetically related to us. She'd just been grafted onto the family somehow. She was like my grandmother's friend or something, and she didn't have anybody else, and every year for each grandchild, each of my grandmother's grandchildren, she made us slippers. But God bless her, the first time I saw them, I didn't know they were slippers. I thought they were football covers. That's the shape they were. And they had foot in the front, and then they had room for your foot in the back. And the only people I knew that had foot in the front and foot in the back is the Snoopies, Charlie Brown characters, and she wasn't. And then they were horribly, horribly colored. And now, in Aunt Lenore's defense, she was legally blind. And I think the women at the yarn store took advantage of her, because I think she would go in and say, "I would like some yellow and some red," and they would say, "Here you are, Miss Lenore," and really it would be like puke and vomit, and then she would go home and knit us these things, and then we had to go see her at Christmas, because let's face it, Christmas is the time of year you go visit people you otherwise don't like. And it's so obvious because you knock on the door and you're like, Merry Christmas. And the subtext is, if I liked you more, I would visit more often. So, and then and Aunt Lenore had that particular old lady smell. If there are even any old ladies in the audience, I'm not referring to you. I'm sure all of you have the general old lady smell, which is lilacs or something like that. But Aunt Lenore had that particular old lady smell that was an equal combination of mothballs and cat urine. And it just... And then you had to hug her. And hugging Aunt Lenore was like hugging an old Christmas tree because you were going to get poked. And chances are you were going to come away sticky, and if you weren't very gentle, you'd break off a limb. So we went through that, and then about 3 days before Christmas, I discovered I was home alone. When you're the last of 5 children, people never get tired of telling you, you're everyone's responsibility, which is code for you're nobody's responsibility. Everybody just assumes that everybody else is taking care of you and teaching you things. I was probably 18 before I knew the difference between my shoulder and my elbow. And so sometimes I would just find myself alone. It wasn't neglect, it was the 70s. And so I wandered into the living room, and there was the Christmas tree, and there were already some presents underneath of it, and I thought, well, we might not even make it to Christmas. I might as well see what I was going to get. And so I opened the ones that were to me, and then I rewrapped them. Now, my mother is a meticulous wrapper, and that is in no way a hip-hop reference. And I put the presents back as best as I could, and then finally, it was Christmas Eve, and I was lying in bed, and I had these 2 warring emotions going on. I was anxious, and I was excited. I was anxious because there was still time for it to go wrong. We were just a few hours from Christmas, but who knows when that sneaky Jimmy Carter was going to take us down, or if Dad was still going to kill Rudolph. If we could just make it a few more hours, but I was excited because we were this close, and if we could just make it a few more hours, everything would be fine. So I lay in bed with those emotions waging, and I don't know if I heard it, or if I dreamt it, or if I just imagined it, but I think I heard the screen door go foomp, foomp, and then I heard blam, and I thought, he did it. He killed Rudolph. And I must have gone to sleep because I woke up, and that's evidence that you went to sleep. It's like, what? I'm driving. And so, in our family, I don't know how it works in your family, but in our family, Santa didn't leave the stockings by the fireplace. Santa in our family brings the stocking in and lays it beside the children in bed so that as soon as the child wakes up, there's the stocking. And my parents, my grandfather, and Santa Claus all worked in conjunction on our stockings. We got the same thing every year. From my parents, we got an orange and a walnut because they had lived through the Depression, and they wanted us to know how miserable their Christmases had been. And then from my grandfather, each grandchild, throughout the course of the year, my grandfather saved his prescription bottles, and he would fill those up with coins, and then each grandchild got 1 prescription bottle full of coins. But the thing about Gross Papa, he wasn't interested in equity. He just wanted everyone to get, so you got the coin that fit the diameter of the bottle. So one kid was getting like $1.20 in dimes. The one you wanted, he took some enormous pill. It was about that big around. It fit an Eisenhower dollar. So one kid was getting $20, one kid was getting $1.20. And then he never washed the prescription bottles. So about halfway through Christmas, your mom would be like, take that dime out of your mouth. And you'd be like, but it feels so good. And then from Santa, we got every year, we didn't know this existed outside of Christmas. Every year, each of my siblings, we got 2 packets of flavored Quaker oatmeal. We thought that only existed at Christmas. We got 1 packet of maple and brown sugar and 1 packet of cinnamon, apples and cinnamon. And that would be our breakfast morning for myself and my siblings. Well, I woke up, and until I was 11, I wet the bed. Not continuously. I got some other things done. But I had wet the bed that night. And so my oatmeal had already begun. And I thought, this is terrible, because it's Christmas. And that means when nobody's looking, I'm going to have to swap that with one of my siblings' oatmeal. And we got upstairs, and we opened the presents, and something strange had happened. The presents, which I had opened a couple of days before, were no longer what they had been. Like what had been a football was now just a pillow wrapped up with tape to be shaped like a football. And I opened something else, and it wasn't what it was supposed to have been. It was almost as if someone knew that I had looked. And then I opened something that I don't remember what it was supposed to be, but I may have given myself away when I said, this is not supposed to be a 16-ounce can of mixed vegetables. And then I had to learn a very important lesson. And let's face it, Christmas is no day to learn a very important lesson. And that night, as I lay in bed, I know what I wasn't thinking. I wasn't thinking, I should be thankful for what I do have, because even this terrible Christmas is probably better than a lot of people's best Christmas. And I should be thankful that I have educators who want to broaden my horizons and are willing to take a chance in a community. And I should be thankful that I have a family that loves me when they remember me, and also is willing to take care of the marginalized people on society and make sure that they feel included in the community as well. And I should be thankful that I have a house with a nice roof to sleep under and a nice, safe, warm bed to pee in. But I wasn't thinking that. And I also, what I wish I'd been thinking, but there's no way I could be thinking the following, because I was only 5 and I just couldn't have articulated it. But I wish I'd been thinking, almost all of these problems were caused because of misunderstandings. Almost every one of these things. And I bet 90% of the problems in the world are caused by misunderstandings because we fail to understand one another. And the worst part is that sometimes that's deliberate. We sometimes deliberately misunderstand people. We see someone and we don't want to hear or listen to what they say because of who they are, who their family was, what color they are, who they love, what religion they are. We just immediately shut off our understanding receptors. And I think that in this world, if we would just take 5 minutes to really listen to what other people had to say and really try and understand what they were saying, we could probably solve 85% of the problems in the world. But I wasn't thinking that because I was 5. What I was thinking was, this is the worst Christmas ever. Thank you. Now, I wrote a book about 9 years ago, I guess. I was playing with my son. He was 5 at the time. And he said, let's play Kingdoms. And I said, okay. So we went behind the couch, and he said, I'll get the stuff for my kingdom. And he got all the big stuff. He got like the Tyrannosaurus Rex and the pterodactyl and the Tonka truck dump truck and the Tonka truck fire truck. And he said, I'll be the king of big things. And I said, okay, what do I get to be king of? And he gave me a marble and a paper clip. And he said, you can be the king of little things. And I said, oh, that's a great idea for a story. You play by yourself. I have to go to my office. Cat's in the cradle. And so I went to my office and I wrote this story called The King of Little Things. And when I wrote it, it was probably, I don't know, maybe 2,000 words, maybe 2,500 words long. And I didn't write it to be a book. I wrote it to tell as a story, and I started to tell it, and a friend of mine heard it. She's a fairly famous children's book author. And she said, would you like that to be a children's book? And I said, duh, of course I would. And she said, okay, we're just going to have to edit it a little bit. And I said, jokingly, I don't care how much we edit it, as long as at the end there are 3 words left, by Bill Lepp. And that's about what there is left. For the next 6 years, we edited a 2,000-word text. edited down to about 740 words. And it was an interesting process because I'd get a call from one of the editors and they would say, on page 8, this line right here, we have to cut this line. It's totally inappropriate for a children's book. It doesn't make any sense in this context, and we just have to get rid of it. And I would say, but I love that line. And they would say, in the publishing world, you have to learn to kill your babies. And so I would take that line and I would take it out of the story. And then a year later, I would get a call from the very same editor, and they would say, on page 8, we're missing something. We need a line. And I would say, I have a line. And I would take the same line that I had cut a year ago and put it back in, and they would say, that's totally appropriate for a children's book. We love it. It's fantastic. We have to keep it. Why didn't you think of it to begin with? So this went on for a long time. And then finally, they hired the illustrator. And the publishing house that I worked for, when you are an unknown author, they pair you with a reasonably well-known illustrator so that when someone looks at the cover of the book, they recognize at least one of the names on the cover. And the guy that ended up illustrating is a guy named David Wenzel, who was famous for illustrating some stuff for J.R.R. Tolkien. And it's a beautiful book. The illustrations are fantastic. And I did have a little bit of input in this process. And I really wanted a guy named Brian. I think his last name is pronounced Lees. It was beautiful. It really would have been appropriate. His paintings are great, and he would have done a great job. But the real reason I wanted him is because his last name is spelled L-I-E-S. And I wanted the spine of the book to say Lepp Lies. But they hired Wenzel, and he had enough clout that he said, yeah, I'll illustrate it, but then it has to be out, a year from the day I turn in the illustrations. And I think without him, it may have never gotten published, but it finally did get published. And so I'm going to tell you the story of the King of Little Things, but I'm going to tell you closer to the 2,000-word version because that's the way I've memorized it and the way I like it. If you then think to yourself, especially like you and you little three over there and you right there, if you want a copy of the book, you then turn to your adult person and you say this. You say, I heard that handsome, hilarious storyteller. That's me. You don't have to say the handsome part. I heard that storyteller tell that story in the oral version. These are the important words. I heard him tell it in the oral version, and I think that it would benefit my educational process were I to have the opportunity to compare and contrast. You got to get that in there. The written and the oral versions, and bam, you'll have a book. So here it goes. Long ago, far away on the other side of the mountain, there lived a king. He was the king of little things. He was the king of keys, coins, crumbs, and condensation. He was the king of needles, noodles, knots, beetles, baby rattles, little toy soldiers, ballerina dolls, pin cushions, pet names, and small kindnesses. Now, all around the king of little things, there were bigger kings. There were kings of cities, kings of counties, kings of countries, and kings of continents. The big kings made their subjects pay for everything, for freedom, for food, for firewood. The king of little things gave anything to anyone who asked politely. The big kings all had big castles. They'd have huge parties on Friday and Saturday night, make all their subjects attend. The king of little things had a little cabin, might have a few friends over. The big kings all had aspirations. The kings of cities wanted to be kings of counties. The kings of counties wanted to be kings of countries. The kings of countries wanted to be kings of continents. And the kings of continents wanted to rule the world. The king of little things, he just wanted to remember his wife's birthday. And that line did not make it into the book. Well, one day, one of the big kings, King Normus, he decided it was time to take over the world. So he got together his generals, he got together his advisors, he amassed his armies, and he set out, and he crushed the kings of the cities, and he quashed the kings of the counties, and he conquered the kings of the countries, and he obliterated the kings of the continents. And when he thought that he had taken over the entire world, he had his jewelers make him a huge crown with thousands of tiny jewels, and his tailors make him a fine suit with big brass buttons. And he threw a huge party, and he stood in front of everyone, and he said, I am now the biggest king that ever was. I am the king of the sky, the king of the mountains, the king of the clouds, the king of the ocean, the king of the whales, the king of the pachyderms. And he would have gone on like that forever, except a servant in the back of the room raised a tremulous hand. And he said, "Excuse me, my enormous sire, you are indeed the king of the sky and the king of the pachyderms, but I am afraid that there is one king whom you have overlooked in your quest to conquer the world." And King Normus said, "Who, which, what? What king have I overlooked in my quest?" And the servant said, "Sir, you have overlooked his minuscule majesty, the king of little things." Well, this sent King Normus into a rage. He said, "King of little things, king of little things. Little things don't have a king. Everybody knows that little things exist simply to serve the bigger things." But still in all, he amassed his armies, and he set out to conquer the king of little things. And they got to the king of little things' cabin in the evening. And the king of little things was in the kitchen doing the dishes because he knew that it was the little things that matter the most. And as David Holt says, no man has ever been willingly shot in the back while doing the dishes. It is also not in the book. Well, the king of little things knew that the big king's armies would wait till the morning to attack. So he went out on his front porch and he respectfully asked some of his subjects if during the night they would invade the big king's camp. And when the big king's armies awoke, they couldn't attack, because chiggers and ticks and mosquitoes and no-see-ums had gotten underneath their armor. Athlete's foot fungus had crawled down their boots and in between their toes. There were worms in the meat and weevils in the wheat and flies in the fruit. Termites had eaten away the arrow shafts and the spear shafts. They'd eaten away the cannon wheels. They'd eaten away the catapult. And King Normus requisitioned new equipment: arrows with steel shafts, spears with steel shafts, cannons with steel wheels, a steel catapult. King of Little Things asked his friend Rust to ride his friend Dew into the camp. And once again, when the big king's armies awoke, they couldn't attack. Rust had eaten through the armor. It had eaten away the arrow shafts. The cannon wheels wouldn't roll. The catapult was now about as dangerous as a cantaloupe. And so King Normus was in his tent, marching back and forth. What am I going to do? How can I defeat this king? I can't defeat this king. He controls the little things to create chaos. And then he had an idea. He said, "I know what I'll do." He said, "I'll cheat." He said, "I'll lie." Because the king of little things is not the king of lies. Because a lie, no matter how small, is never a little thing. Not everyone knows that I'm aware of that. He said, "Send a soldier with a flag of truce, tell him to get the king of little things to come here to discuss the situation of the siege, and when he gets here, we'll throw him in the dungeon, lock him away." Well, they sent the soldier, and the king of little things came with him. He knew what was happening, but he also knew that his subjects would come to his aid if need be. And as soon as the king of little things walked into the big king's tent, all of the little things in the room recognized their king. The coins rolled out of King Normus's coffers. The jewels jumped out of King Normus's crowns. The fillings fell out of his teeth. The buttons jumped off of his coat, bowed down before the king of little things. King Normus's suspenders surrendered, his belt broke, and his pants fell down. That rocks in elementary schools. And so there stood King Normus, trying to hold up both his pants and his pride in front of the king of little things. And he was so upset, he said, "Throw him in the dungeon, throw him in the dungeon." But when they got to the dungeon, all of the little things recognized their king. The keys refused to unlock the dungeon doors. The nails jumped out of the doors, bowed down before the king of little things. King Normus said, "Put him in a cave, put him in a cave, put a rock, a big rock, in front of the cave. No food, no water till he surrenders his kingdom." Well, the king of little things went to the cave, and life wasn't entirely unpleasant in the cave. The ants brought him crumbs, and the bees brought him honey, and the birds brought him seeds, and little drops of water made their way down through the mountain and dripped into his mouth. But after a while, King of Little Things missed his queen, he missed his cottage, and so he sent word with the ants and the birds and the bees to ask the little things everywhere to do him a favor. And the ants carried the words like crumbs, and the bees painted the words on the flowers, and the birds dropped the words from the sky like rain, and all over the world, little things began to happen. Hangers unhung, strings unstrung. Springs sprung. Tables toppled, chairs folded, easels eased away, quilts quivered, quills quit, bolts bolted, fires froze, pickles undilled, boats listed, weights lifted, words twisted, cookies crumbled, bread broke, ticks and tocks left their clocks. Everything, everywhere quit working. And everybody knew that it was King Normus's fault. And they demanded that the King of Little Things be set free. Well, King Normus could see that he was beat, so he surrendered his crown, and he loaded some of his enormous possessions into his enormous wagon, including his enormous wife. She was very tall, and off they rode. And the people presented the crown to the King of Little Things. And he asked very little of his subjects, except that they tip generously, oil hinges regularly, leave crumbs for the ants and the birds, and plant flowers for the bees, and say please and thank you. And everyone lived adequately ever after. Except, of course, King Normus, who could never find his pocket watch or his wallet or his comb, and maybe even he will someday learn that it's the little things that matter the most. Thank you very much. Thank you.